Right.
Right, welcome. This is a quick fatigue index to this week at the launch of FotMob and SofaScore and publicly available performance data. So running, sprinting, walking, stopping, all that stuff you'll start to see. Sky are doing a thing on it today. There's the Premier League launches. And with me, I have one of the other oldest fellas ever to work in football, which means he's been working in footy for well over 20 years. Dave Carolan, how you doing?
Well, good, Simon. Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction. Yeah, it's nearly on 30 years now, but I'm on a stay of execution at the moment, so hence why I'm sweaty. I've been out in the sun running, and we're going to be talking a lot about running today, aren't we?
How far did you go?
It was only 12.5K today, but it was
How did you know this?
well. I use a tracker. Uh,
Ooh.
You might have seen them on watches and things like that, which you can see on your common and garden footballer nowadays wearing them in training. But I can tell you, when we started nearly 30 years ago, the idea of wearing anything apart from your boots and your kit was frowned upon. So even trying to get them to wear heart rate monitors in 97, 98, when we were starting this stuff, um, was absolutely out of the box thinking, some kind of mad scientists that were being employed in football. And what was football becoming? Were not laboratory rats, as some of the players would say. Scroll on to today, nearly 30 years later, the players are wearing all sorts of contraptions. Most of them introduced by people like me, but we have many other sources of data. We've got cameras at stadiums, we've got satellites, we've got GPS units. We've got so much going on that we can track players to within an inch of their lives.
Right, so quickly around that, the types of tracking that are used in professional football, down to grassroots. Currently, we have so this in specifically is the data that's going to be shown publicly is collated by Optivision, which is. Can you explain what Optivision and how they create that data?
Okay, so you've got a few protagonists in the market who deal in what we call computer vision or optical based tracking, okay, which is essentially they use a series of cameras. Now, the methodology of these differ from company to company, but essentially they're taking footage. They're using really clever algorithms and systems to essentially track all of the players, the ball, the referee, and everything that happens on the pitch. They're compiling those multiple feeds, and the algorithm then spits out essentially the live tracking of the players, how fast they're running, how far they're running, the direction they're running. Some of the more advanced systems can give you segmental analysis of actually if the player is changing their stance. They can understand orientation. So they are the major ones that we will see in the stadium. Now, for the eagle-eyed viewers, you will have seen the players wearing these sports bras over the years. So when they take the shirt off, you see this kind of black or white, maybe branded, maybe not, what looks like a vest. And on the back of that vest is normally a GPS monitor. Now, some of the companies, yes, a little small GPS monitor that sits in between the shoulder blades. Some of the companies actually use integrated heart rate systems within those vests as well. So that's quite interesting as well, that they've taken away the need for you to wear a specific heart rate monitor. It's already built in. But essentially that will track similar metrics, but in a different way. Okay. So rather than using optical data, they're using GPS data. But they also have magnetometers and accelerometers inside them as well, which gives you different data than you can get from all of the optical stuff. So all of the explosive metrics, the rate of change, angle of changes, and so on and so forth, are a little bit more granular when you're using those systems.
So from a training perspective, we can look at acceleration, deceleration, velocities, and that kind of stuff, and forces. But that isn't the stuff. So that would be a great pod in itself, but that's not the stuff that's available that we're going to see. Interestingly, Do you know the differences in accuracy between like optical stuff and what we'll use in this is would be a wearable? I think that'll be the two differences in this.
Yeah, so essentially most of the optical systems are relatively accurate in relation to the GPS, especially on the gross metrics. And the gross metrics are things like distance, so how far somebody runs. Okay, so essentially when you look at these different systems, and again, as I said, there's whether you're using Optivision or Second Spectrum or TrackAb or Skill Corner or Impact or any of those, so what you can see straight away is they're all currencies, but they're all just slightly differently weighted and slight different levels of accuracy. Now, what FIFA have been very good at over the years is setting a benchmark for accuracy in order to be allowed to be integrated into any of the kind of performance metrics that we see out there. So all of the GPS units, all of the other systems have to go through a benchmarking normally with FIFA. That in itself has become a little bit of a political minefield the last few years because it's almost you pay for it, you get through the qualifications, whereas some of the companies have now decided that they're not going to do that. However, the point still stands that on most of the metrics, they're reasonably accurate in relation to GPS. Now, what we have to bring into account here is that not all of the clubs use the same type of GPS monitor. Some will be with Stat Sports, some will be with Catapult, some will be with player data. All the referees are on player data. You'll have Fit Together. You'll have so many other types of system that can record GPS. So even comparing between clubs on GPS, you won't get the same answers. However, on a league-wide basis, using the same system that everybody is seeing, the same data means in and of itself, that data is accurate to itself. So when you're comparing apples and apples, there's going to be a certain amount of congruence.
Nice. So to go through these different categories that you'll be seeing, so we'll have total distance, which on one of the apps is in miles and one of the apps is in kilometers and meters. So let's remember that we're in, the Western world and we use, not in America, we use kilometers and meters here. From a sports science perspective, that's how we live. We work in meters, kilometers. So what would be, so each category, so we have total distance, which stands alone. That's obvious what that means. But I do want to go into that a little bit. And then we have on FotMob, they use sprints as a category, sprint distance in meters, running, which I'm guessing is high speed running. But it might be running and jogging, which is splits because we create little tiered thresholds to categorize each different speed, velocity, and walking. Okay, so first, could you just run through the general thresholds that we would use? What does a sprint? What speed categorizes this movement as a sprint?
Okay, so generically, anything that's over 7 meters per second, equivalents in terms of miles per hour or kilometers per hour. You'll often see in some leagues it's reported as kilometers per hour. But essentially, if we take meters per second, it's over 7 meters per second is a sprint based on the classifications. High speed running is anything over 5.5 meters per second. So what you have is 5.5 meters per second to 7 is high speed running, 7 and above is sprinting. Below
so
that,
we could designate this as 25k per hour and 20k per hour.
Yeah. Essentially, those are your descriptors in the other language. If you want to use it as the meters and kilometers, in miles per hour, it is different again. But essentially, they're your descriptors. Now, the challenge with some of those things, these are called absolute levels of speed. Okay. So everybody is being applied to the same level. So if you're me and you're relatively slow, only because I'm older, you'll understand that. When I was younger, far quicker athlete. But for me, sprinting, my bandwidth for 7 meters and above for sprinting might be to, let's say, 8 meters per second. So I've got 1 meter per second of bandwidth to collect sprint. Okay. But if you're Mickey van der Ven, you might have 3.5 meters per second of bandwidth to collect sprint distance. So for me, trying to get any kind of volume of sprint on this kind of report, if you want to call it, is going to be difficult because I've only got a small bandwidth. I'm going to be maxing out to try and sprint. Whereas for your average Premier League player, that's far too slow. They're not really sprinting at 7 meters per second. They're much faster than that. So what you will see is this real difference in sprint exposure among players. And certainly your faster players are going to see far higher volumes of sprint. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're sprinting more. It just means on this generic bandwidth that everybody's being applied, they will definitely look like they're sprinting more.
So we're using semantics here in that so what I'm looking for is the average fan can look at the data and see this is a sprint. So all that means is it's beyond 25 kilometers per hour. But what you're talking about and how sports scientists apply this is what percentage of a player's maximum are they hitting for a sprint. So anything over what 85% of their maximum speed is a sprint for an individual. So let's use a very prominent sprinter of the summer, Anthony Elanga. And if he is making one sprint down from the halfway line, get to the corner flag, so that distance, it'll be 55 meters. So let's say he'll be running 50 meters that at full speed. He's going to probably get 48 meters of sprinting, but probably 20 meters where he's actually in his top 10% of his maximum speed. But for an average, say if who's slow, Nat Phillips is sprinting down. I shouldn't say Nat Phillips with Dave on here because one of his old players. But yeah. Let's say John Terry. If John Terry even now is running down that wing, he might just clock over the 25, but he'll be running balls out the whole of the way. So he's sprinting as hard as he can, but it's just not over that 25. That's all it means. So both of them are sprinting, but only one of them might get a sprint in the count of sprints, but also he doesn't cross over that threshold for meters. So what Dave is saying is that it's much easier for fast lads to get a high volume of meters above the 25.
That's right. And the potential side effects of just releasing all of this data to everybody is you might look at John Terry and think he's lazy, but actually John Terry could be overcooked in terms of some of his sprint distances. Just you won't necessarily see that because his threshold needs to be lowered and Anthony Elanga's needs to be raised because he's very, very fast. Therefore, as I said previously, 7 meters per second for him just isn't sprinting. He needs to be starting at, say, 8.8. Now, 8.8 might be faster than some of the players in the Premier League, but that doesn't matter because that's in relation to them. That's why we use when we're comparing an individual to their own outputs, we use relative metrics and relative thresholds, which are based off, as you said previously, a percentage of their max. So when you're dealing with someone who's a 10 meter per second player and a 9 meter per second player, you can't compare them necessarily, or should you compare them on the same metric? But for the sake of this, you're going to see some players who're going to be on match of the day or whatever your chosen poison is for analysis, and they'll be hyper analyzed saying hasn't sprinted, or done a lot, and both can be essentially fake news.
So what we're saying here, right? I want to go down this tangent in a second anyway of the training, but good and bad is a bad judgment of these numbers because we don't know context for lots of different reasons. We don't know context. All we can see is more or less. And you can't attribute value to this. It's just more or less. Who ran more or less? Who ran fast above 25 meters per second, more or less? That's all we can see in this, which is handy if you're going to say gamble on this kind of stuff. So you can then quickly, like with fantasy league football, go, oh, I know the 6 fastest lads. I can gamble on who's going to run the most in this game. Taking into account a little bit of what variables might impact that debate, Dave? That say, let's go. Anthony Elanga, who plays for Newcastle, is playing against Liverpool. Liverpool are at home. Anthony Elanga, the fastest player in the Premier League, or one of the fastest players in the Premier League. Jeremy Frimpong, the second fastest player in the Premier League. Who would you be betting on to get the highest distance in that, the highest sprint volume in that game?
Well, thankfully, I wouldn't be able to bet on it anyway because my involvement in football. So that's the first thing. But notwithstanding that, what would somebody else do? There's so many contextual things you have to take into account before you just say somebody else is going to run someone else. Let's talk about the game models that are being applied. Within the game model, what's your role expectation? So you can have wing backs in similar formations, but how they're employed and what they're asked to do in terms of the game model could be completely different. They might have a natural predisposition to be more of a defensive wing back or more of an attacking wing back. Some models then might expect them to drop into a back four at times or roll into midfield. So straight away, you're having to take into account the kind of tactical nuances of the game model of the coach or the club, and then the individual employment of that role expectation and what they do. Let's also add into the mix that the game state is, of course, going to drive what's going to happen. So team scores early, other team might have to attack even more. Whereas before the game, they might have been in a pretty much a containment and holding pattern and try and nick something. If you're away from home at Anfield, you might be just thinking, let's get to 70 minutes and then we'll go for it, as opposed to opening ourselves up early and then potentially you could get a hiding.
So here's quick layer of context. What would happen? Those two players. So Frimpong's playing right back for Liverpool. Alanga's playing split striker, whatever, on the wing for Newcastle, right? And it's 0-0, and Liverpool have the ball for the first 70 minutes. What's that going to look like for those two players? So.
But you could have Elanga who spent a lot of the game not having to do an awful lot, because if Liverpool have had a lot of the ball and they're just recycling it, he's potentially not sprinting an awful lot. He may be just in a pattern, keeping shape and then waiting for counterattacks. But if the other team are that good at keeping it, you may not have to do that. Whereas someone like Frimpong might have had to do countless shuttles and explosive actions to try and get into roles, doesn't get the ball. So what we know from quick players is that sometimes as the game goes on, that superpower is such that super strength of being explosive and very, very quick gets diminished because of fatigue. It's not something that if they've been doing a lot during the game is just going to maintain towards the end. And that's why when we see with role kind of responsibilities and, the kind of signature of certain players and positions is you will see that your central midfielders aren't particularly quick, but they can run all day. Your wide players are normally exceptionally quick, but they're the first ones that you sub because you allow them to go out, unload, and then you change them for other equally quick players. And that's the pattern of the kind of 60-minute player that we're kind of seeing come into the game now, which is you go out, you leave it all out in 60 minutes, you sit on the bench, next guy comes in and he unloads for the next 30. Which is a challenge when you're like a wing back, which is one of those difficult positions that we could keep you on, but we could swap you. Whereas for the attacking players, it's normally not much of a decision. Like normally nowadays, you're saying 2 or 3 of the central of the attacking line are going to be changed. So 70 minutes in, if Elanga still hasn't done much, he may have some extra reserves in the tank, so he could potentially go again.
It makes sense. So it's crazy people judging like how much running people have done in one game when the context of the game is you block up the middle and then Frimpong is having to make inside outside runs all over the place to try to threaten because he's left Elanga and he's going to try to commit the fullback on the opposite team and then get back in each time anytime they lose the ball. So it's going to be kind of interesting for people to, because this data is going to be live as well. So it's going to be in the app. 31 minutes. There's Mo Salah. He is only covered 3.2 kilometers in the game distance, which I want to talk about anyway. And he might have made 30 meters of sprints. Is he being lazy? Do Liverpool just have the ball and there's nowhere for him to run into? But then what happens when a couple of things. What happens when you're playing two teams with bad midfields and the ball is going one end, somebody's getting lost to the other end? What's going to happen to the high speed distance in that game?
It'll probably be really high for both teams because they're just going to be trucking up and down the pitch all the time, you know. So when I've looked at this in the past, when you look at actually time that teams retain possession for, and then you see a diminishment in intensity the longer they can keep a ball. If you can keep a ball for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you're going to see that the natural intensity of the game is going to drop. Everybody's into a pattern. Everyone's just moving along, trucking about. And you actually see an awful lot of walking now in the Premier League because teams are so good at keeping the ball and rolling it around that actually in that kind of 5-6 second press, if you don't get it back, you drop into shape and then you maintain it, you know. And it's that denial of space for your quick players to be able to exploit, because actually if you can stop a Mo Salah having space to run into, you take away at least one of his great strengths, you know, which is obviously the speed and the dribbling side to it. It doesn't mean he doesn't have other ways of, you know, unlocking you, but certainly for maybe lesser players who don't have all of the kind of rounded game that Salah would have, there are reasons why you would just deny their space. And then you're just hoping that maybe they don't get the one opportunity in the game. But when you're a high possession team, there's always the fear of that counterattack. And that's where those quick players can really exploit space, high lines. You know, you start to see that, haven't you, in some of the preseason games where teams are playing really high lines, and it's becoming more of a trend back towards when we started years ago, to actually clip the ball into space behind people and just run.
Yeah. I don't know. Just a tangent from this really is that as both of us have been around this for a long time, that you do see these cycles go, but these cycles are contextualized by the change in the athlete that we're seeing on the pitch in the first place. So 10 years ago, you might have seen the ball knocked over the top deliberately, diagonally. So the random right winger can be super fast and outrun the relatively fast fullback, but they're getting way past the centre backs because they're too slow to get in. But now we've been through, I feel like the last 5-8 years, this wave where you're getting all of these huge giants that are all rapid now. Like the slowest player in the Premier League you're getting within 2 or 3 kilometers an hour of Thierry Henry at his best. Like you have to be super, super fast to play Premier League football at all. But because everybody is so super fast now, we're still working in margins. There's still one lad that might be 1 or 2 kilometers faster. And if he can, and you're always going to be faster if you're running that way ahead of you and you didn't have to turn. So if you can get a quarter of a second on a centre back who's having to turn as the ball gets knocked over his head, they might get away, and all that space is behind. And they've done this. The coach has done this risk reward matrix. And him having his centre backs on the halfway line so they can compress space in the opposition's half to prevent a potential to recover the ball super high, which is an attacking tactic these days. That's worth the risk of being the ball knocked over the top and somebody taking a false step and getting beaten by a meter. But I feel like that's coming in this season. I think we're gonna see that. It started to come in last season a little bit more. Forest were obviously the biggest exponents of that, but it's definitely going to be a thing as some of the I would say traditionally lesser sides who have bought technical players, they don't have all technical players, so they're going to have this very cultured technical model, but then there's going to be a 1 or 2 weaker technical let's say soft spots to be pressed, but the ball might turn over if it goes there. Then they're going straight in behind. That's how we're going to see the Premier League this season. It's going for a phase of control, but I think we're going to have a lot more turnovers, which is going to be interesting when it comes to looking at the running data. One of the things I really want to make people aware of when we're talking about optical and the different kinds of data different kinds of methods we've used to collate and create the data we're going to see now. Year on year, it's changed. So people can't be, Sky will be, because they've had distance cover data for 5 or 6 years now. But that will be 4 different companies that they've been getting their data from. People can't compare good or bad. As I said, you shouldn't be comparing good or bad anyway. But they can't really, in all good conscience, be comparing whatever numbers they see in this season with 3 years ago, with 4 years ago, team by team, because of context, tactical context change, but also the efficacy of the technology has changed. So
it won't mean that they won't do that, because if they need a story and they want to make a point, they're betting that me or you or whatever, yes, we may be lone wolves in some social media channel somewhere saying this is highly inaccurate. We saw it last year with an example from Forest where Elanga made a sprint. Immediately this was the speed of it.
Usain Bolt.
Yeah, it's kind of like he's the quickest player, whatever. And then you suddenly, right, okay, well, I'm going to use some basic performance analysis and I'm going to actually time it. And then you realize that actually it's 1.5 seconds out and the distance is actually a lot shorter because Forest pitch, you can get the dimensions of it. You can work out what the distance he was. And suddenly you realize that what you've just been told is not the truth. But that doesn't matter because it's around social media before truth has got its trousers on, So that's the challenge, which is if you want a story, you can make a story. And there will be stories coming out of this. It's like the Cunha story last year. He walks 74% of the time or something like that. And the counter argument is, but he ended up with 14 or 16 goal involvement. So if he's walking and he's then producing other metrics which are exceptional, there's a reason why Wolves played him. There's a reason why teams wanted him, and maybe why he's made the move he has done is because irrespective of whether he ran one game at 70 or walked one game for 70% of the time, his other metrics are the balance to that, and for every sensational story you're going to see this year about somebody doing exceptional amount or very little, remember that there's loads of other context that goes into that. We're going to see games where players get sent off and the team still manages to make up, kind of, they won't make up a whole player, but they might make up 80% of the player's output by everybody contributing a little bit more. And because the game might change. And in some reasons, we've known about this idea of social loafing for a long time, which is once everybody's got a full team, you all do maybe enough, but some players will choose to do less. But when you've got less players, you have no option, but you have to do more. So those are going to be the stories that we're going to see coming out of this kind of stuff. I do feel like we're going to see some challenges with this because the players are going to now be essentially not outed, but the story is going to be made about whether they did or didn't do something. And let's be honest, it's not necessarily going to always be the positive stories that are going to make it into the media. People are going to jump on the fact that somebody hasn't sprinted in 2 games. And we won't know the context behind necessarily why that is. All we'll see is the raw number. And that's where it is really for the media to be really responsibility with the data that they're given. Yes, you're going to make some stories, but remember at the end of that are players who are going to be sat in clubs and dressing rooms facing fans and social media that are going to have pylons because the story's been told in a certain way, and maybe it's not exactly the truth of what actually happened.
There are going to be things like it's going to be very obvious in some cases, like last season with Rashford, the whole professionalism, not professionalism. He's he's a United legend. Like the devout fans giving him whatever support that they possibly could against others. So when they see that he is running less than any other striker in the country, for whatever reason, that doesn't matter, but they'll be able to see that, and that creates a massive story.
Of course it does. And, you know, as much as you can turn around and say that Messi does an awful lot more than any other striker, attacking player in the whole world when it comes to physical output, you can also flip it and see Ronaldo at his best and see that he did some monstrous stuff in terms of physical output. Are they both great players? Yes, they are. Would you both want both of them in your team if you could? You probably would,
Yeah,
because they have other things which offset that. Now, um, I still think we will end up, as you said there, with some stories coming out because, yeah, if it fits a narrative that people want to portray about a player or a club, then you know they'll store up the story until it's ready to go. um, there's a real responsibility with data like this, and this is why we've seen challenges with some of this data in other countries and in other leagues and sports, which is obviously the players data is the players data. They have produced it, you know, so there are all those considerations around, you know, GDPR and in other countries HIPAA and whatever it might be, about the usage of this data. And that's why the responsibility of how the story is told is going to determine how successful this is going to be in uncovering insights and, you know, behind the scenes information on the players and on the teams to give us better understanding of how they play and why the game is played like that. But if it's used in the wrong way, it'll just end up creating real problems for players where, as you say, you can walk in and celebrate being the best in the league at sprinting, but your team's bottom of the league. But, you know, well done, me. Um, at the end, the clubs, we've always had this data. We can always not, we haven't always been able to see everybody else's data, but in the last few years, we could see players' data from across the league in the championship. When it comes to scouting, you can get this information pulled into you. So there's no surprises out there within the clubs. They're going to know about this stuff, and the players are going to know what they do. The bigger thing here is now that the data now crosses the threshold from being within the game as such, within the clubs and the organizations, to being outside of that and in the public domain. And that's the challenge: is who's telling the story and why are they telling that story?
yeah, there are definitely stories. There are going to be stories within this. I think people, if you're going to get like armchair analysts who start collating this data online themselves for fan media, whatever. Well done. Do that. Um, but be aware that you probably understand it less than you understand shot conversion and touches in a game. That's okay. But over time, you can start to see trends and stories, and I bet there'll be some really smart fan media kids who start to see stories within the data of game models and position specific in game models that we haven't seen yet. Because I think that's how data analytics has actually developed in the last 10 years from really smart kids.
Yeah, but you also see some of the best people in the game who work at, you know, okay, people may not like FIFA or UEFA for whatever reasons that they don't like them, you know, which is normally in relation to something that's happened their club or their league. But some of the work that happens behind the scenes in terms of the analysis of tournaments, you know, both from a physical and technical point of view, is fantastic.
Sure.
And there's real insights to be got from those sources about how teams express how they do what they do. You know, so whether it's Weigman with the Lionesses and how they use essentially what was, you know, one of the lesser technical teams at the Euros, but were still able to overcome multiple games where they were behind in the game and still managed to win it. You know, so there's a story there not only about grit, but there's also a story there about having a physical capacity to keep going in games and eventually overcome an opponent who potentially is tiring or whatever. So, yes, I think it'll be exciting to see what, you know, Chelsea ran a thing recently around data visualization hub and innovation, and some of the stuff that was produced there by amateurs, if you want to call them, people who hadn't been in the game, was outstanding. information and dashboards that you can pull up all sorts of information. So I think that that's coming our way. We've seen the revolution in the technical stats and the tactical analysis, and now you're bolting this in. So I think it's going to just give us another layer of depth and understanding around who's playing the game and how they're playing it.
I think a consequence of this that isn't going to be a headline is that the XY stuff is going to be, which is the position on the pitch. So every touch, every action on the pitch is given an XY coordinate, but now the speed of which is going to be brought into that as well, the speed of movement of all of the players. So there's going to be stuff, next level analytic stuff like what is a play? How often does a player miscontrol the ball after reaching 29 kilometers per hour? Or what is the XG threat of an action that occurred more than 30 kilometers an hour? That kind of stuff is going to be real, and I think making it public, it almost crowdsources the analytics to people that don't think in a traditional sports science way, but have these incredible skills.
Yeah, and that's good for our industry as well, which it shakes it up because we get new, interesting takes on the game, which is people that didn't think that way. That's something that data analysts have brought in because a lot of them are agnostic to the game. They're dealing with the algos and the machine learning and the AI that's involved. We had to get AI in there, didn't we? But essentially, they've allowed us to see data differently and understand that differently. So yeah, more power to it because it's only going to be where the game's going. Where more data streams that now become publicly available. You've seen it in the other sports. Where let's say the NBA has fundamentally changed now from an inside shooting game to a 3-point game. So is that to the benefit of the game? Who knows? Because the product is still the product, and it's still millions of people watch it. And the game that we started with 30 years ago when we were involved is fundamentally different. Now, lots of things have changed around that. The pitches are better, the boots are better, the conditioning's better, nutrition's better. All of those things are better. Does it mean that the game itself is better? That's up for other people to decide whether, you like the rough and tumble and maybe the more toughness that it was many years ago, because it only seems the slightest breath on a player now and they tumble to the ground, it's a free kick. Some people actually preferred it when it was a little bit more tougher, to get the ball out of someone. Tackling was an art, whereas nowadays you rarely see tackles. Obviously they're talked about as duels now, but essentially as soon as the player feels any kind of contact, they're falling to the floor and they're guessing a free kick. So will this create the other potential side effect that we see, which we know from back in the day when famously Sam Allardyce at Bolton seemingly said, if you don't run 10K in a game, you're not playing. So you ended up with players doing random things throughout a game in order to get more distance.
In 8 years ago, Klopp rewarded Liverpool players with a day off if the team did 120K.
Yeah.
So that 8 years ago, in a very open to sports science mind, theoretically, still had that understanding, which leads me to, which is the most pointless of the numbers that are going to be attributed?
Well, I mean, you're going to see some strange stats, like per minute stats. So you can come on for 1 minute, sprint onto the pitch, clear the ball, sprint up after it, they knock it back over your head, you sprint in, and in 1 minute you might cover 250 meters.
So that's going to be normalized to when we go to per 90 data sets, which is really common in football. That is going to be he ran 35K. Boom. That's what it's going to look like. He runs 35K per 90, and he's going to sprint 24 kilometers per 90 minutes.
Unbelievable stats. And at that stage, you go, what's the point of that stat? We all know he was a sub. We know what happened in that time.
Yeah.
You have to account for it, but you need that filter, which is player introduced with 45 seconds, runs on to defend a corner, chases his own clearance, tries to go and score a goal, realizes that he's going to get a bollocking from the manager because he just ran out of position when he's supposed to be defending, sprints back in. And as you say, that's going to look like an enormous physical capacity. Whereas in reality, it was situational, it was contextual. And therefore that's an outlier, in which case you filter that one out.
So of the separate categories, distance, sprint volume, running volume, walking volume, where would you? Some have got to be more useful than others, more interesting than others. Where would you put the least interesting and not important? Where would you put the least interesting and the most interesting?
I mean, volume in itself is just telling us how far somebody ran. So what's that a function of? How long was the game? 90-minute game, 100-minute game. You've got 10
average
minutes.
96.3 last season. The average Premier League game lasted 96 minutes, 18 seconds.
Okay, so within that, then there's how much is the ball in play. So if you're in a high possession, high football game, say it's just over 60 minutes. If you're in a low footballing game, you could be down as low as 40 minutes.
Just for context of the listener, the numbers that you see recorded are recorded from the first and last whistle of each half. So whatever happens during that time, all of that movement is going to be added. So if there's a water break, still everybody walking over to the side. So if you're the width of the pitch, 65 meters width of the pitch, the right back having to walk over to the left-hand side of the halfway line, he just got 130 extra meters of walking. So just accordingly, if you add up all of those from an 11 player perspective, you're going to probably push an extra K almost just from a water break. So the total distance, what does it really mean?
So that's one of them, the per minute thing. So this is why we used to always break it down into distance covered ball in play, distance covered ball out of play, because some players do walk around, but at least we know what they were doing when the ball was at play, because some players sprint back into position, other players don't have to do a thing. If you're a fullback who's been caught up the pitch from a free kick because you centre forward gave it, you've now got back to defend on the edge of your box. The same centre forward might be just stood exactly where he gave away the foul. So very, very different in terms of all those kind of contextual bits are really, really important to look at. So you need to take out the duration of the game, how long the ball was in play, who had possession of the ball, and then things like game state. So once I take that all into account, actually bits that are more interesting rather than less interesting are density of some of the actions. So how often was I being asked to sprint, and how close were each of those sprints to each other? I think they're more interesting in terms of how the game is being played, because this concept that we've developed more recently over the years around worst case scenarios, I want to see what the worst case scenarios are going to be, because that's going to guide where I need to develop players for in the future. You'll always get somebody who doesn't cover a lot of distance or doesn't run a lot or doesn't sprint a lot. There's plenty of those. The more interesting thing is now going to see what are the extremes of the game that we need to prepare for. As you said, when Thierry Henry was a bit of a unicorn, right, you kind of wrote that off. But when you've got 40 of them, you can no longer write it off as a defender now. You can't say, Henry's quick, therefore I'm not going to have to deal with that every week. You are going to have to deal with that every week. So you better get robust. You better get quick. You better be doing everything you should do to allow you to cope with it.
Yeah. So would you say my feeling on these stats specifically, rather than taking GPS from an overall analytics and training perspective, because a lot of the data we won't get. So you're only getting the top line of data. We're not getting per 5-minute blocks, or which is what people look at for looking at density, and there's no relative thresholds for individual players, which what we use for training. So we're looking at volumes. My feeling has always been, even with max velocity, top speed recorded, is these numbers are opportunity based. What is the game granting in terms of opportunity. So high speed, the top speed typically is covered if it's a full pitch transition. That's when your highest speed is going to occur. Like, how many times does that happen? I bet to, like, let's say Virgil van Dijk, it happens twice or three times a season where there's a full length of the pitch sprint. Most of the time, they aren't going that far. You're going to get three or four different players that might, going back to Alanga again, where those, say, Brentford or Forest, that set up deliberately to cause those moments. So you're going to get 4, 5, 6 players that create the opportunity, that have deliberately created the opportunity to hit those massive numbers. And within a game, high turnovers are going to create high distances for both teams. Because 11 players are moving at the same time. And then you've got 11 players on each team moving at the same time. So the total distance of that team is going to go up just by opportunity. So my feeling about these are, there is going to be, you're going to be bookended by, there are going to be thresholds that are dictated by game state, but a lot of it is opportunity, not capacity. So any judgment on any individual player, this player can run 800 meters of high speed in a game. This player does run 800 meters of high speed in a game. It doesn't mean he can only run 800 meters if you're comparing him against, say, Bruno or Bernardo Silva or whoever you're comparing. It's just an opportunity base given by the game model and then the opposition.
Yeah.
So good
and change opportunity into, if you're going to QPR, you've got no space. So even if there is plenty of transition, there's no space. It's a small pitch, it's a tight pitch. So therefore, even if you do have to sprint, the game, the pitch is so compressed, the area of the pitch is so much smaller than, say, Anfield or Wembley. And not the Wembley thing.
It's a small pitch, but yeah.
Yeah, but even Wembley's not the biggest of pitches.
No, well, there's a standard. It's
standard size.
Yeah. People don't talk about it. The press don't talk about it. The media don't talk about it. There's a standard size. 7,140 square meters is how big a football pitch is in more than 85% of football pitches across Europe. And we have outliers, like Forest is the smallest pitch in the league. Fulham have a really small pitch. Everton did, but now they're going to be
Luton.
Yeah,
Luton, QPR. So
Liverpool.
You have to take those into account, that they're not going to change unless the stadium changes. So
if Liverpool are playing their home games on a pitch that's 300 square meters smaller than the average Premier League pitch, their average distances are going to be smaller, aren't they?
Absolutely.
I mean, they're less fit.
Potentially, but then the ball might stay in play an awful lot longer because Liverpool are a high possession team. So, you've got all these things you have to take into account. So we used to look at, for example, which referee have you got? Is he a referee that gives away a lot of fouls? If he is a referee that gives away a lot of fouls, therefore there's going to be a lot of stoppages. A lot of stoppages means less ball and play time, less running. So you'll start to see an equation now between officials and potential distances. So with all of those things taken into account, tactics, players, game models of different coaches, because some will do different things in different ways. They won't necessarily, they may have a game model, but they then might switch that at certain times when they need to, when they're winning, when they're losing, so they flex in terms of what they do. Referees, pitch sizes. So again, if the headlines are going to be how far you ran, how fast you ran, there's going to be some great headlines. The even more interesting stuff is in the detail that we probably won't get, around those splits. We used to, in terms of worst case scenario, most teams would look at what was the maximal output for 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Guess what? It's in the first 5 minutes of the game. They might get the odd 1 or 3 minutes towards the end of a game where suddenly something happens. But generally speaking, if you want to look at distance covered, start of the game, meters per minute through the roof as both teams go at it. Everyone's full of beans, everyone's excited, psychologically up, crowd roars, off we go. So if you base your game off that, you're always going to be trying to catch, something that's essentially not really representative. You're better off taking out that first 5 minutes and then going, what does the rest of the game look like after it's settled down? Is this a high intensity game? Is it a game we're going to have to sprint a lot, and so on and so forth? Because, whether you're PSG now using this model where they're drilling the ball into the corner and then everybody chases in and they, put you under pressure straight away. Was it PSG or was it Real Madrid? One of the PSG. Yeah. So drill it in the corner. Everyone squeezes up. What's everyone doing? First thing, they're all sprinting to the corner. Great. So sprint numbers straight up high. Is that representative of how they play a lot of the time? It may not be.
So the only way, I think the only real value in this, apart from talking points, is over time, you might see, if you look at high speed running volumes with a trend, just look at the trend of which teams have high speed volume, might tell you something about the intensity their game model plays at. I would think that's probably the only interesting statistic out of these.
Yeah, if you want to go, you can look on the Bundesliga website. You can find out the max speed of all of the players in the Bundesliga for the last however many years. Yeah. That information is publicly available.
Yeah. So that's what's going to be available this season. So, right. Last thing on this, because I just want to, if you've got 2 more minutes, is what is typical for a position? So what would be a typical research-based? I could read off a bunch. Paul Bradley, go look him up. Has a whole bunch of this stuff from FIFA studies that Dave was mentioned earlier. It doesn't even matter of numbers. Fullbacks run the most high speed. It's fairly typical.
Yeah, generally speaking, you're going to see fullbacks in the modern game doing that. It used to be more wide midfielders.
Yeah.
So as we were speaking about beforehand, a Darren Huckabee, those type who would be cruising around, they'd be doing potentially 1,500 meters high speed running.
Yeah, which is absurd these days. You don't see it that much. You from midfield, you're going to see Zobo do that, and pretty much no other midfielder's in the league is going to do that. So I'm going to put on Everton Index the different position specific norms.
There you go. Yeah,
for somebody to look at. Plus, just for reference, so we don't get shouted at, the 20 and 25. So 20 meters for 20 kilometers per hour for high speed, 25 kilometers an hour for high speed is for men's football. 19 and 22 for women's. Just getting the women's out there. I actually think that's a bit high, by the way. But they're the norms that that StatSport and FIFA decide. But yeah, and I'll break down. So I'll give position specific data for men and for women. I might even sling some for academies if you're interested in that stuff too. What's kind of normal for around there. So don't look at good or bad for these numbers in any of the FotMob stuff, but look it up. It's probably as informative as how many touches or passing percentage. So it's all context driven. Dave, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you and listen to your awesome podcast?
Right. Well, we actually talked about some of this data stuff on Breaking Lines, which is my podcast I've done in the past with Gary Rowett, where we talked about death by data and are we overanalyzing the game. So go and have a look at that. Season 3, we kicked off with that about this time last year, death by data or death by analysis. So yeah, at Dave Carolan on Twitter, X, Instagram, any of those places, you'll get a mixture of professional insight and everything from my life. So you can see what I do on holiday. On LinkedIn at Dave Carolan. I was one of those people who got all his social media handles for his name before anyone else. So just very simple at Dave Carolan. And check out the new iDrills, i-drills.com website, where we're going to be releasing some of this new innovative tactical board information.
He has blurred his background now, so you can't see it, but it's awesome. It's a Buteo level tactical stuff. But if you like tech, Dave's app iDrills I use it regularly. It's the best in the business for creating training sessions for football.
There you go.
There you go.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. There you go. Plug in at the end.
Bye. There you go. Good work, dude. I really, really, really appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks, Simon.